For decades, Americans have reported seeing an animal that, according to official wildlife records, should not exist. The descriptions are remarkably similar. A large feline, completely black, long tail, powerful shoulders, moving silently through forests, mountains, farmland, and remote back roads. Sometimes the animal appears for only a few seconds before disappearing into the darkness. Sometimes a witness watches it long enough to describe its size and movement in extraordinary detail. And sometimes, according to the reports, the creature crosses a road directly in front of a vehicle before vanishing into the trees. These stories have accumulated for generations, and what makes them unusual is not simply that people claim to have seen a black panther. It is that wildlife agencies across the United States have repeatedly addressed the phenomenon in official statements. Missouri's wildlife authorities have stated that no melanistic mountain lion has ever been documented by science. Similar explanations appear in statements from Tennessee, Colorado, Texas, and other states. The wording varies, but the conclusion is remarkably consistent. There is no scientifically verified population of black mountain lions in North America. Yet that statement raises an intriguing question. Why have wildlife agencies spent so much time explaining an animal they say does not exist? The answer is that the reports themselves have never disappeared. For decades, hunters, farmers, forestry workers, law enforcement officers, ranchers, and ordinary motorists have submitted accounts describing what they believed was the same basic animal, a large, dark-colored cat moving through environments where no officially recognized black big cat is supposed to live. The modern history of these reports stretches back far beyond the age of smartphones and trail cameras. During the 20th century, sightings were frequently recorded through newspapers, local police departments, wildlife offices, and private correspondence. In many cases, there was no photograph and no physical evidence. That made the reports impossible to verify. But it also created a strange scientific problem. If every individual report was dismissed as a mistake, the existence of thousands of independent reports became difficult to explain collectively. Perhaps people were seeing black dogs, bears, bobcats, ordinary mountain lions in poor lighting, or even large house cats viewed from a distance. Those explanations are certainly possible. But the recurring descriptions of an unmistakably feline animal, particularly in regions where mountain lions are absent or extremely rare, continued to keep the mystery alive. The crucial scientific question is not whether black big cats exist. They unquestionably do. Melanistic jaguars are real, and their biology has been studied in detail. In 2003, genetic researchers led by Eduardo Azaric published important research examining the molecular basis of melanism in felids. Their work identified a mutation associated with the black coloration found in jaguars, involving the melanocortin-1 receptor gene, or MC1R. Unlike a simple visual variation caused by lighting or seasonal changes, melanism has a genetic mechanism. In jaguars carrying the relevant variant, increased production of dark pigment can overwhelm the normal spotted pattern, producing an animal whose coat appears almost entirely black. That discovery changed the nature of the question. The existence of melanistic jaguars was no longer speculation, it was genetics. Camera traps in South and Central America have repeatedly documented black jaguars, demonstrating that the phenotype can persist naturally within wild populations. A 2020 study examining global jaguar populations further explored the distribution of melanism and estimated that the dark coloration occurs in a significant minority of the species. The exact frequency varies between populations, but the important point is simple. A black jaguar is not a biological impossibility. It is an ordinary genetic variation within a species that already exists. And that leads directly to one of the most isolated and fascinating landscapes in North America, the mountains of southern Arizona and southwestern New Mexico. Here, the landscape changes dramatically within a relatively short distance. Desert grasslands rise into rugged mountain ranges covered with oak, pine, juniper, and other vegetation. These isolated mountain systems are known as the Sky Islands because they resemble islands of forest, surrounded by a sea of desert and grassland. To an ecologist, however, they are more than isolated mountains. They form part of a much larger biological network known as the Madrean Archipelago. The Madrean Archipelago stretches across the international border and connects the Sky Islands of the American Southwest with the Sierra Madre mountain systems of northern Mexico. This region has long been recognized as an important corridor for wildlife. Animals do not understand political boundaries. A mountain lion does not stop at a border crossing. A jaguar does not recognize a line drawn on a map. If habitat exists on both sides, animals can potentially move through it, following prey, water, shelter, and seasonal opportunities. And jaguars have already demonstrated that they can do exactly that. For much of prehistoric and historic North America, jaguars occupied a vastly larger territory than they do today. Fossil evidence shows that jaguars once ranged far north of their modern Mexican strongholds. During the Pleistocene, their broader North American distribution reached into regions that would be considered astonishing today. Over thousands of years, however, the species gradually disappeared from much of the continent. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, persecution had become one of the major forces driving the remaining animals from the United States. Predators were systematically killed to protect livestock and game populations, and the American jaguar population eventually disappeared as a recognized breeding population. But the landscape itself remained. The mountains remained. The forests remained. The corridors remained. And south of the border, jaguars survived. That distinction became important in the modern era because individual jaguars began appearing in the United States again. These were not legends. They were documented animals. One of the most famous was a male jaguar eventually nicknamed El Jefe, meaning the boss. Beginning in 2011, camera traps in Arizona's Santa Rita Mountains captured images of a large spotted jaguar moving through the landscape. Over the following years, El Jefe was photographed repeatedly. More than a century after jaguars had effectively vanished from the United States, a living male had returned to Arizona. The discovery was extraordinary because it demonstrated something that had previously seemed almost impossible. A jaguar could travel north from Mexico, cross the border region, and survive for an extended period in the mountains of Arizona without being immediately detected. El Jefe remained in the Arizona landscape until roughly 2015. Then he disappeared. For years, there was no confirmed evidence of his location. Had he died? Had he moved south? Had he crossed into another mountain system? No one knew. Then, in 2021, a camera trap in Sonora, Mexico, captured a familiar pattern. Researchers recognized the distinctive arrangement of rosettes belonging to El Jefe. The animal that had disappeared from Arizona had apparently survived and traveled deep into Mexico. His journey demonstrated the remarkable ability of a large predator to move through this landscape while remaining largely invisible to humans. And that is where the Black Panther mystery becomes more complicated. Since the late 1990s, multiple individual jaguars have been documented in the American Southwest, particularly in southern Arizona and the surrounding border region. Every confirmed animal has been spotted rather than black. That is an important fact. there is currently no scientifically verified melanistic jaguar population in the United States, and no confirmed black jaguar has been documented north of the border. But the biological corridor connecting northern Mexico and the American Southwest is real. The jaguars living in northern Mexico are also real. Melanistic jaguars are real, and the genetic mechanism responsible for their black coloration is real. The unresolved question is whether those facts ever intersect in the United States. Imagine standing on a ridge in the Santa Rita Mountains just before sunrise. Below you, desert grassland stretches toward distant ranges. Somewhere beyond those mountains lies Mexico, and beyond Mexico lies the much larger jaguar habitat of the Sierra Madre. Between these landscapes is no biological wall. There are roads, fences, developed areas, and other obstacles, but wildlife corridors still persist through the gaps. A jaguar moving north would not announce itself. It would travel at night. It would avoid people. It would follow prey and cover. It might cross a road once and never appear there again. If the animal were spotted, the witness might have only seconds to identify it. And if that animal happened to be black, the identification problem would become even more complicated. A black feline moving through darkness could easily be mistaken for a mountain lion, bear, large dog, or something else entirely. A photograph taken from a moving vehicle might contain too little information to establish the species. A witness might remember the animal accurately, but still misjudge its size or distance. A wildlife agency receiving such a report would therefore have a legitimate scientific reason to remain skeptical. But skepticism is not proof of impossibility. This distinction is at the heart of the Black Panther mystery. Science does not normally establish the existence of a species through eyewitness testimony alone. A verified photograph, genetic sample, carcass, skull, tissue sample, or other physical evidence is required before an extraordinary claim can become part of the official record. Thousands of reports cannot substitute for one verifiable specimen. Yet the absence of a specimen does not automatically explain every sighting. It creates a gap. And that gap is where the mystery has survived for generations. The modern scientific record tells us that no melanistic mountain lion has been confirmed. It tells us that melanistic jaguars exist, but that no confirmed black jaguar has been documented in the United States. It tells us that individual jaguars have crossed into Arizona and survived there for years. It tells us that the Madrean archipelago provides a connected ecological landscape between northern Mexico and the American Southwest. What it does not tell us is what every animal moving through that landscape looks like. Because the cameras cover only a fraction of the terrain. The mountains are enormous, the forests are dense, the borderlands are remote. Much of the landscape is privately owned, inaccessible, rugged, or simply too large to monitor continuously. Even sophisticated camera trap networks provide samples rather than complete surveillance. El Jefe demonstrated this limitation dramatically. A large male jaguar lived in Arizona for years and was photographed repeatedly. Yet, after leaving the monitored landscape, he effectively vanished from the scientific record until another camera eventually captured him hundreds of kilometers away. That does not prove that black jaguars are crossing into the United States, but it demonstrates how easily even a large, unmistakable predator can disappear from human observation. And so the question remains suspended between two possibilities. Perhaps the thousands of black cat reports represent decades of misidentification. Bears glimpsed at a distance, mountain lions seen under unusual lighting, oversized house cats, dogs, or memories transformed by fear and storytelling. Or perhaps a very small number of genuinely unusual animals have occasionally moved through landscapes where scientists have simply never managed to document them. At present, the evidence does not allow us to choose the more extraordinary explanation. There is no verified black mountain lion population in North America. There is no confirmed melanistic jaguar living in the United States. No carcass has established the claim. No DNA sample has settled it. No photograph has provided indisputable proof. But there is something else that cannot be ignored. The corridor is real. The jaguars are real. The genetic mechanism for melanism is real, and the reports have continued for generations. The black panther may therefore remain exactly what it has always been. Not a confirmed species, not a proven population, but an unresolved question sitting at the boundary between human observation and scientific evidence. Because the wilderness does not provide evidence on our schedule. It does not stand still for cameras. And somewhere beyond the last road, beyond the final trail camera, there are thousands of square kilometers of mountains and forest where an animal can move for months or even years without ever appearing in the scientific record. The question is not whether science has proven that a black panther lives in the American wilderness. It has not. The more unsettling question is whether the wilderness has ever been completely watched closely enough for science to know what is moving through it. Between 2011 and 2015, a male jaguar identified by the unique arrangement of his rosettes was photographed more than 100 times in Arizona's Santa Rita Mountains. Researchers eventually gave him the informal name El Jefe, Spanish for the boss. He became one of the most extensively documented jaguars ever recorded in the United States. His images showed a powerful male moving through the rugged landscape south of Tucson, apparently navigating the same ecological corridors that connect Arizona to northern Mexico. Every photograph showed the same unmistakable feature: a spotted coat. There was no evidence of melanism. No black jaguar had been found. Then, in 2015, El Jefe disappeared. For years, there was no confirmed trace of him. The cameras that had repeatedly recorded his movements stopped capturing his distinctive rosette pattern. Researchers could not say with certainty whether he had died, moved south, or simply traveled beyond the network of cameras monitoring the region. The absence became another reminder of how quickly even a large predator can disappear from the scientific record once it leaves a monitored area. Then came 2021. A camera trap in central Sonora, Mexico, captured an image of a male jaguar. Researchers compared the animal's rosette pattern with photographs from Arizona and determined that the individual was El Jefe. The identification was supported by the Northern Jaguar Project, which had extensive experience documenting jaguars in northern Mexico. The animal had apparently survived and moved roughly 120 miles south of his last documented Arizona location. For 6 years, the corridor had effectively swallowed him. This is important because El Jefe was not a mythical creature. He was a large predator carrying a distinctive coat pattern that should have made him relatively easy to recognize. Yet, even with professional researchers actively searching for him, he disappeared from the record for years. And El Jefe was not alone. Since 1996, multiple individual jaguars have been documented in southern Arizona and the surrounding Southwest by wildlife agencies, researchers, and conservation organizations. Each confirmed animal provided another piece of evidence that the border region remains accessible to jaguars. But there is also a striking pattern in those records. Every confirmed jaguar was spotted. Not one was black. That absence matters. If black jaguars were regularly entering the United States, scientists would expect eventually to obtain photographic or genetic evidence. The longer the confirmed record remains entirely spotted, the more difficult it becomes to argue that melanistic jaguars are routinely crossing the border. But there is another side to the equation. The black cat reports have not disappeared. Across states such as Mississippi, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Missouri, wildlife agencies continue to receive reports describing unusually large black cats. In Canada, similar reports have been recorded in parts of Ontario. The witnesses are not limited to one particular profession or social group. Some are hunters sitting in elevated deer blinds. Others are farmers working fields at dawn. Utility workers have reported dark cats moving along remote rights-of-way. Law enforcement officers have described large feline shapes crossing roads during nighttime patrols. In some cases, the sightings last only seconds. In others, witnesses claim to have watched the animal for considerably longer. Missouri is particularly interesting because its Department of Conservation has historically received numerous reports involving unidentified large cats. Yet the official explanation remains familiar: misidentification. And that explanation is scientifically reasonable. The problem is that the animal being misidentified is often not clearly identified itself. A witness reports a large black cat. The report is classified as a mountain lion, bear, dog, or other animal that the observer may have mistaken. But the original observation is rarely independently reconstructed. There may be no photograph, no DNA, no footprint sequence, no recovered hair. The report enters a database as an unverified sighting and eventually becomes part of a much larger collection of stories. This creates a difficult statistical problem. If thousands of people independently describe large black cats across several decades, there are two broad possibilities. The first is that humans repeatedly make similar identification errors when confronted with ambiguous animals in difficult conditions. The second is that the reports are detecting something real. The evidence currently does not allow science to choose confidently between those explanations. And that is where the color itself becomes important. The reports do not usually describe ordinary mountain lions. They describe black animals, not brown, not tan, not gray, not spotted, black. That repeated description does not prove the existence of a black panther population. Human perception is notoriously vulnerable to darkness, distance, movement, and expectation. But the consistency is still interesting. If independent observers repeatedly describe the same unusual coloration over decades, the pattern becomes something that can be studied rather than simply laughed away. The question becomes whether the reports represent a common perceptual error or an underdetected biological phenomenon. And modern genetics tells us that such a phenomenon is biologically possible. The melanistic form of the jaguar is produced by a specific genetic mechanism involving the MC1R gene. Research led by Eduardo A. Zirich and colleagues helped establish the molecular basis of melanism in jaguars. The relevant mutation alters the production of pigment, causing the animal's coat to become dramatically darker. In a melanistic jaguar, the familiar rosette pattern may become extremely difficult to see against the black background. This is important because a black jaguar does not require a new species. It does not require an unknown evolutionary process. It does not require a mysterious mutation appearing out of nowhere. The animal already exists. The coloration already exists. The genetic mechanism already exists. The only unresolved question is whether that genetic variation has ever been carried by a jaguar that traveled far enough north to enter the United States. In northern Mexico, melanistic jaguars have been documented by camera traps. The jaguar populations of Sonora therefore contain the biological possibility of black coloration. Some of these populations occupy landscapes connected, at least in principle, to the mountain ranges of Arizona. This is where geography becomes crucial. A border fence may interrupt the movement of some animals, but it does not transform the biological landscape into two completely separate worlds. Mountain ranges continue across the border. Rivers continue across the border. Prey species continue across the border. Vegetation continues across the border. And predators can move through the remaining gaps. Male jaguars are particularly important because young males are known to disperse from their birth ranges in search of territory and mates. At the edges of a species distribution, dispersal can become even more significant because individual animals may travel substantial distances through unfamiliar landscapes. That means the relevant question is not whether an entire population of jaguars has moved into Arizona. It is whether a single individual could. Biologically, that is a much lower threshold. One dispersing male could travel hundreds of kilometers over time. If that male carried the genetic variant associated with melanism, the animal would possess the same black coloration observed in jaguars farther south. The distance between northern Sonora and the Sky Island ranges of southeastern Arizona is not an astronomical barrier. In ecological terms, it is a challenging journey, but not an impossible one. And this is where the mystery stops being purely about eyewitness stories. It becomes an ecological detection problem. Consider the ocelot. Once, ocelots occupied a much broader portion of the southern United States. Their historical distribution extended across parts of Arizona, Texas, Arkansas, Louisiana, and other regions. But as habitat was fragmented and populations declined, the American population became increasingly restricted. By the late 20th century, fewer than 100 ocelots were believed to remain in the United States, concentrated primarily in the lower Rio Grande Valley of Texas.